Welcome to Conscious and Curious with Crystal Schultz, where we deep dive into the questions and mysteries of life. We learn through the personal stories of individuals and topics such as philosophy, esoteric truths, wellness, religion, and spirituality. With meaningful conversations and thought-provoking ideas, we'll learn together and hopefully inspire consciousness and intentional living. Let's dive in. Welcome. This is Crystal Schultz with Conscious and Curious. And I have, again, today, my wonderful co-host and cousin, Azalea Klein, Azalea, as I call her. And we're here for part 2 of tradition versus ritual. And we found that last time there was just so much that we wanted to say that we didn't get to. And then we've had a few more thoughts. So why not part 2? And here we are. So welcome and let's dive in. We did introductions last time, so we'll skip that for this time. But hi, Azalea, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Of
I'm
course.
excited.
Me too. We're both
Excited to
new to podcasting. So we're, you know what, giving ourselves a lot of
come.
grace and we're just having fun with this. I'm
Yeah.
determined to not get too wrapped up in all the shoulds, you know?
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
that's what we do best together is just have fun and laugh. So
It's
go
true. It's
deep
true.
and laugh.
Go deep. And you know what? That makes it deep even better. And I definitely laugh the most with you probably than anybody. So
Yeah,
fantastic.
ditto.
Awesome. Okay, so let's jump in to we touched on a little bit last time towards the end about storytelling and fear-based traditions, and we wanted to come back to that and then add a little bit more we'll get into later. But let's start with storytelling as traditions and stories are passed down. I love that you brought up the girls. Now, where was it that you were at? The girls that you said were telling their story that they had grown up in
Mm,
the system, in the foster system, and
yeah.
didn't have their own history to know or to
Correct.
tell. And where was this the class that your sister was doing?
It wasn't a class, it was just a celebration, a ancestry celebration on Halloween. So it was the Ancestors Storytelling Festival that she's decided to be very dedicated to trying to bring meaning to the American tradition of Halloween and bring some depth to it. So yeah, that's what the
Beautiful.
event was.
Okay. And so these girls came as a group.
Yes. So I guess it was a class from a school, their teacher. I guess it was a class that was for support, um, for kids that struggle. And so this teacher, got a handful of them and said, let's go, to this event that's being put on um, and hear people's stories, but they also wanted to get up and tell their stories, but um, they didn't know anything about their family history. So, and they wanted to tell their life story, which couldn't really happen because it was a family event, and they had very traumatic stories from when they were younger. So you could see visibly that there was some pain there for them, but more than anything, they wanted to share their story. And that was what was interesting to see.
That's so beautiful. So the thought came to me because as we were talking about that, and I really appreciate what you said too about how our stories and our histories and our traditions give us confidence. I thought that was a really important note. And then also it reminded me of something. I had been in a therapy session once, and the therapist was saying something about how when we start taking the step back, because this is a trick that therapists use a lot, which any parents could do with their children or you can do for yourself. Um, in when you're getting wrapped up into a story or something, how do I put it? Not story, let's start that over. But when you're getting wrapped up in the emotion, you're
Mm.
saying, oh, I feel really angry and this happened and this happened. And then hold on, I'm gonna edit that.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so this tool that the therapist said was that when you're in the middle of therapy session and then they pause and say, "What are you feeling right now?" And just the step back that you get right there where you can take a moment to consider, and really you're gaining your awareness, right? And awareness is
Mm-hmm.
huge in
Mm-hmm.
the spiritual and the mental and meditative state and all of these things that I study and practice. Awareness and consciousness is the most important thing. And so what they're really doing is he's saying, okay, how are you feeling right now? Now it's time to check in. And you check in with your
Yeah.
body and you see, what is the awareness here? What am I feeling? And they told me that's when you get out of your reptilian brain, which is like your
Mm.
fight or flight, your instinct, and you go into what I would call,
Survival.
yes, the survival. It's what I would call is like the
Mm-hmm.
higher self and the consciousness, to be able to look at it more objectively and not just be identifying with the emotions, but to be in that true self, in that true name, right? Um, and so I noticed one time somebody was saying about how healing storytelling is and telling our own stories. And I recognized, hold on, when we're doing that and we're looking back and we're saying, this is what happened, and this was the order of events, or this is how this sequence came about for me, and the conclusion and the effect it had on my life, etc. We're doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
We're
Mm-hmm.
going into that mode of like consciousness and awareness, and then it's also you start making connections and it starts healing you inside, but also others that are like, oh, I noticed that too, or I can see a parallel in my own life or whatever.
Right.
But I noticed that that is like a form of therapy, to have storytelling as part of your life. And even I think these stories that were passed down, because it is part of us, like that whole
Right.
concept of how, I think there's a name for it that I don't know, but um when a baby girl is in her mother's womb, she's carrying all the eggs that she will birth, right? That she'll potentially
Right.
birth
Right.
one day. And so
Yeah.
all of those eggs are also being impacted by what's happening as she is in her mother's womb. So you're literally experiencing your grandmother's energy and your grandmother's experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
her story is your story because you were there
Right.
too, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. It is crazy. That's crazy to think about. It's amazing.
Right? Anyway, what do you think on that? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I just love that you talked about, this reptilian brain, which I've never heard it called that before, but this survival state. And and you said, moving out of that into our higher self. And in my mind, I mean, I agree with that. But in my mind, it's moving, shifting. Like, what does that step back in awareness and give to us? It gives us the ability to move out of survival and into living.
Mm,
And I feel like living is aligned with the higher self. I feel like people say the higher self all the time, and it's like, oh, I want to transcend up and above and flying high. And it's like, I think the higher self is one that's able to live a fulfilling life regardless of the ups and downs. One that's happy that you get to the end and you're like, I did my best. And so
yeah.
I feel like that's kind of aligned. Um, the way I relate to the higher self and how people use it often, it feels kind of distant and disconnected, but I feel like, truly once you gain that awareness to be in the emotions, step back, observe yourself, see it, and shift out of survival is really giving you the opportunity to live your life finally instead of being crippled and caged in by this survival state. And that is the higher self to me, in my opinion. So I love that you brought that up. And the storytelling as healing, like it made me think of, especially within our family. I think it's pretty common within our church as a whole, but I don't know. if it's as common in every family as it is in ours, for um, the elders, if you want to call them, to write their life story as they
Right.
start getting into that last quarter of life, where it's like, okay, I'm 70 or 80 or whatever. I'm going to start writing my life story. And I think there's an importance to that for them to pass down their story to their children and grandchildren. But more than anything, I think it's one of life's biggest therapies. There's this desire as you get to the end of life to tell your story, even if it's just for yourself,
Yes.
because so many things, you're at this point, you're nearing the end where you see everything so much more clearly. So many bows can be tied on situations that maybe you didn't find closure for before, but it's this whole process of healing, I think, that takes place. And so often I think the focus is heavily on, like, well, let's write our story for our children and our grandchildren and our great great grandchildren. And that's true, because we're going to touch on, you know, the importance of knowing where we come from and what we gain from that. But
Mm.
so often it's overlooked why it's important to tell our stories for ourselves, even if we're the only
Yes.
ones who read it. And so I love that you brought it up, because it's healing. And you're able to see so many things that didn't make sense. It all comes together. And then lastly, I thought of my dad and storytelling. He told so many stories of his childhood to us when we were young, and those are classic stories that we learned about him. And they're really funny, they're crazy, they're insane. I mean, just he was raised in a rough place, but it passed down, those just hearing those stories passed down certain traits, not morals and
Yeah.
characteristics into his children. So, um, I was also thinking about that. Like, yes, our story heals, but it also does pass down important messages. Whether we're even, I don't think he was trying to tell us any specific message. He wasn't like, you know what? I'm going to tell these specific stories because it's going to teach my children this. Like, he was just telling his
Mm.
life stories because they were insane and hilarious and entertaining, you know? But they
Yeah.
did so much more than that for us as his children. They taught us important things. And so, um, wow, just, yeah, storytelling, so multidimensional and blesses so many people in so many broad ways. So,
Totally.
yeah.
Do you do that with your children now?
I actually don't. It's really interesting, since I am, my degree is in English and my emphasis was in creative writing, that actually I don't talk to my children much about my childhood. And I think that has a lot to
Mm.
do with inner child stuff that I have to work through. But um,
Gotcha.
I tell them about how psychotic we were as children in my house. It was a freaking zoo.
Oh
I'm
man, and
like,
I loved it. Every time I come over and I'd be like, "Wow, is this what a big family's like?"
you're like, there is so much energy in here right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
That was
yeah.
so good though. Well, that's cool. I have noticed for myself it's been hard. Like there are things
Hmm.
that'll come up here and there and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, one time I did that," or when I was a kid. But honestly, I don't consciously. I feel like at least with your dad, because my parents, I feel like sometimes they would tell me stories, but not very often. And like grandma, our mutual grandma, she really didn't talk about herself like
Yeah.
ever. And when she lived at my house, I remember thinking, because I was in high school, so I was like in my own world. But I
Right.
remember thinking one day when she was more sick, like, why didn't I just sit down and talk to her more? And
Hmm.
I don't know if maybe she didn't want to. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the vibe I got. But
Right.
grandpa talked a lot. He had a lot of stories to say.
Yeah.
Um, So, we got those stories for sure. But for myself, it's tough to, even sometimes my kids will ask, like, they'll say, tell me something about your childhood. And it's so funny because to them, the 80s or 90s is like ancient
Yeah.
days. And I'm like, no, that was like 10 years ago. I'm like, actually, it was not 10 years.
It is crazy. Like right now, like I'm filling out my kids' doctor forms and stuff, and it's like parents' birth date or whatever. Or even
Yeah.
just like talking to someone, they'll say, "What's your birth date?" For and I'll say, 89 or like my husband's 85 and it sounds old to me now. I'm like, "Oh my gosh,
Right.
89?" I'm like having these flashbacks to my mom being like 70 or whatever it was. I don't remember what. She was born in like
Yeah.
64 or 65. Anyways, sounding so old to me and now I hear that when I say 89.
Right. Isn't that wild? It's
Crazy.
like,
Yeah.
well, I guess everybody goes through that stage at some point,
Yeah.
right? They're like,
But
oh, I'm getting some years on me. But yeah, so my kids
yeah.
will ask because they're like, what was it like before the internet? And, I'm like, it was like you imagine without the internet. There was, you
There's a
don't
lot of
spend all day on the computer.
boredom.
You're bored, so you play outside and you play with your friends. But noticing the changes, and I think maybe that's the distinction too, is that they are wanting to know what was life like without the conveniences I have, so that
Mm-hmm.
maybe they have an alternative for their life too.
Mm-hmm.
If I
Right.
don't want to just be on the internet or a phone or a game or something, what are my kids are pretty creative and they like being outside and stuff, so it's we didn't have TV for a while, like a couple years or something, so
Right.
they're probably a little more conservative, I guess, in that way than most families. So they're used to being very creative, but I think they're still craving the knowledge of, like, tell me more of what it was like, which, like I mentioned before, was still their experience. They just weren't living it
Right.
outside a body. It was like,
Right.
what is this notion that I feel? And actually, that comes to another point that we wanted to touch on. There's a show. I don't know if it's still on anymore. I think Lisa Kudrow from Friends started it. It's called Who Do You Think You
Oh.
Are? And they would take people, mainly celebrities, and they would trace their family history. And so then this was the whole show, was that they would say, like, we trace your family history, and what are some questions you have? What are, like, questions you have about yourself or your life? I remember particularly, I don't remember which actress it was, but there was one actress that said something about, like, always loving to dance and be, like, showy and on display, and that her
Mm-hmm.
family's so not like that. And so
Right.
she kind of felt bad about it, and then as they delved into her line, they found that she actually had a grandmother that, like, danced, I don't know, in Europe,
Oh,
and
wow.
she's like, "Oh, that's where that passion comes from." I found that interesting that that came up a lot in the show, was it was almost like they were saying, like, "Where does this feeling or this want or this need come from?"
Hmm.
And that's interesting to me. It's like, well, why couldn't it just come from yourself? I just want that.
Right.
But they're
Right.
wondering, like, is there something deeper? And I think because they feel that there is something deeper, and that's why they're asking that question.
Yeah. Well, and I think that brings up like just because it goes deeper doesn't mean it's also just you. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? It's your expression of it because it doesn't matter if, I think we oftentimes give away our power to the line that came before us, but
Mm.
or it feels less unique because you're like, "Oh, well, it's in my family line. Like my grandmother did this, they did this." But but the truth is everyone is such a different flavor and we're all special, but we're all also normal and it's that kind
Yeah.
of polarity, you know? So, yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I've wondered, it's interesting seeing I'm gonna edit that out. I don't want to go that way. Anyway, well,
you
let's
can
move
edit
on
out what I
to
said too.
If you want me to, you tell me. Um, okay, so some really good stuff here. Let's keep moving. I want to talk about fear-based traditions as we're talking about ancestral lines. Um, these fear-based traditions, I think, are really important to note. Um,
Yes.
because it might just be called tradition, and yet it's a fear-based tradition. So you kind of mentioned it before, or I guess we both talked about it last time when you mentioned Moana, right?
Mm.
And I loved your point where it's like she has this drive to cross the sea and be a what's it, a seafarer, or what does she call it? Is that it?
Explorer. She doesn't say explorer, but I can't
Or
remember either.
something like that. And
Yeah.
then turns out it was her history the whole time. And it was like,
Right.
so it's kind of similar to that same thing of like, you're in this pattern with, you have these passions that are similar as your ancestors. But then her
Right.
dad created a fear based, well, maybe even before her dad, because I think it was a
Mm-hmm.
thousand years. So he was living a fear based tradition of you don't go beyond the reef.
Right.
And what did that do for them? Well, it did keep them safe. There was danger out there, but it also was like allowing this encroaching of danger where
Mm-hmm.
they were
Mm-hmm.
stuck. All they had was their island. They had no other way out and probably would have been decimated. I mean, you know. Um, but what are your thoughts on fear-based traditions?
Well, I absolutely love that you brought up that it did have a purpose. It did keep them safe. And so often when we're working through self stuff, it's like you thank the old self for who they were and what they did because they were keeping you safe, you know? And I think you can say the same with traditions, fear-based traditions. Um, I can bring in a little bit of like my personal experience just because of who I am and how I work and function. Fear has always played a very big role in my life. And, you know, I feel like it can really envelop a person when you don't, maybe similar to anger, like when you're using them correctly, they can work to really shift you into wonderful places. But unless you know how to work with anger or how to work with fear, they will just crush you and take everything from you, you know?
Mm.
And so the first thing that comes, and I think we lightly touched on this last episode, was how many of our traditions come from the religion that we were raised in. And so when we talk
Right.
fear-based tradition, one of the first things that comes to my mind is prayer and how
Hmm.
that was heavily a fear-based tradition for me throughout most of my life,
Oh,
but I didn't gain that awareness until, after I was married and had kids and was like, God, you save me now because this is rough. I can't keep doing this. But um yeah, with prayer, I I think that's one of the most important things is we can be living a fear-based tradition, but because it can be such a good tool, like who would ever think that prayer could be a fear-based tradition?
can you expound on that? What does that mean? How was it? It was creating a fear, or it was used as a traditional tool to instill fear, or what do you mean by that?
It was used as a tool to cultivate more fear and by myself. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
this was encouraged in any way by those who taught me about prayer, but it's because of who I am that this is what it ended up being used for in my life as someone who's heavily fearful. And you're told to pray when you're in fear. And so it became exactly what the opposite of prayer should be, which is this OCD type constant needing um prayer, like I'm scared this is going to happen. And when you have anxiety, you're scared lots of things can happen,
Right.
right? So the amount of praying that would happen out of fear and just like, oh, I can't actually control life. This was a tool that
Yes.
I internally decided was a way to control or to that I was heavily clinging to as a form of control. Even
Mhm.
though, does prayer control your life? No. So I was grasping at air. Like, do you get everything you pray for? Is what I mean. That wasn't
Yes.
very clear, but when
Right.
someone
I
says like,
understand.
"Oh, this is something you can hold on to," and you're flailing, falling through the air, and you're grasping at it, well, that's not what prayer is, and it's not how it functions, but that's how I internalized it and
So it became a
used it.
compulsion for
And
you, an OCD
yes,
compulsion, which we're going to do a series actually on some OCD and scrupulosity,
right.
um, but so that was a compulsion for you for certainty, which is an OCD term, right? Instead of, because I do think that in most traditions, prayer is encouraged as a form of faith or an act of faith. And this
Mm-hmm.
instead became the opposite. It became an encourager of
Yes.
certainty, even though it's
Right.
just kind of, it was just what would you say, like a tool to navigate the fear. Or
To
how would you
navigate
put
and
it?
the uncertainty and powerlessness that I felt in life in having
And it became a
any
compulsion.
ability to try to stop bad things from happening in the future. And so like yeah, I think that in the end, what I realized, I remember talking to my sister once about it because I had to stop praying. So I just stopped, you know,
Mm,
which was one of my biggest acts of self authority and trusting myself was because who would ever feel like, especially being raised in religion, um, who would ever if I had talked to my bishop or my parents and told them, you know what, I think I'm going to stop praying, they'd be like, well, I don't think you should stop praying.
wait, what?
Right. But they didn't know how
Yeah,
I was using it. So
right.
one day I told my sister, I still don't pray very much anymore these days. Um, Prayer means something totally different to me. But um, I told her, I had to stop praying because every time I went to prayer, I realized it was all in an angle of fear, coming from a fear angle. And
Mm,
that was the air that I was grasping for that was just giving me nothing except wasting energy and promoting more fear,
right.
if that makes
And
sense.
it's
And so,
not enlivening, right?
right.
Because like, so I've had my own OCD compulsions and um say like, so one for me that I've told you about is
Hmm.
dermatillomania, which is like
Hmm.
trichotillomania. It's like skin picking. It's a
Mm-mm.
compulsive skin picking. And so for
Hmm.
me, it was damaging. It's damaging. It's
Hmm.
something I'm still working through.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, if thinking of, because I think I'm curious if our listeners are going to hear you say like, yeah, but prayer's still a good thing. You should have still done it. But the way
Mm.
that it's being used
Right.
is in a way that is damaging to us.
Right.
Right. Because the compulsions, whatever they are, turn into
Right.
something that is just, it's yeah, like you said, like a grasping, something for
Mm.
certainty that actually I feel like encourages the same feeling. Don't you think so? Or what
It
do you
does.
think?
It does.
Yeah.
It encourages the same feeling. It exacerbates that feeling, and it's you giving your power away. And it's not your power to change anything of your future. It's your power to find peace. And it's your power to have faith.
Mm,
So
yes.
no one would ever want to say, oh, well, that's what prayer did to me. And I'm not blaming prayer because by how I define it now, I pray all the time. And so I'll end this story, but basically what I realized was and this is a famous story within the Bible when um is it Peter steps off the boat
Mhm.
and he goes to walk to Christ. Well, I felt like at that point I had just been staying in the boat and our church teaches, well, it was taught at conference once, right? Stay in the boat. And I had been clinging to that freaking boat for so long, but I was crushing myself. And because of how I took everything to be. And so finally, when I decided, you know what, I'm going to just listen to myself, which, and listen to God, which said, step off the boat. That was stop praying. That was um, stop a lot of things, actually. But what it provided opportunity for was for me to actually know what it feels like to pray. And that's really opening your heart
Wow.
and your mind up to God and aligning your will and His and saying, I trust, I am at peace, I feel safe. And that's a prayer to me. So whether I do it how it's been taught in the church or not, that's prayer because it functions the way that prayer probably does for a large majority of members, you know? But,
Right.
so we have to be willing to step back at traditions that we've been taught and say, but is this actually doing for me what it's intended and taught to do? Because if it's
Right.
not, it's a fear-based tradition and you need to let it go, which can feel really scary or like
I
you're
love
doing
that.
something bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the point and you're bringing up of like clinging to the boat as
Mhm.
being actually it's almost like you're hanging out the side of the boat and you're being knocked by the waves and just like
Mm.
come on walk to
Mhm.
me, right? And
Yeah.
interestingly because the prayer for so many people and for so many generations has been an act of faith,
Mhm.
but for you the real act of it became an act of certainty for you, and then
Right.
when you decided I'm letting go of this, that was your real act of faith.
Right.
I'm letting go of this to see where I land. And then you found a form of prayer that was actually faith promoting for you and
Yeah.
enlivening for you and um, created a deeper bond. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful. And I like your point too of saying, when does this tradition turn into something that is no longer benefiting?
Right.
Um, and like we talked about with Moana, is stay within the reef. That kept them safe. But at some point, they weren't safe anymore. And it was time to reevaluate, right?
Yes, yes.
And
Because
yeah,
yeah, I think with tradition specifically, reevaluation is everything.
yeah, yeah. Because that's the whole point, I think, is when we talked about in the last episode, Fiddler on the Roof, right? And he
Mm-hmm.
says, who makes the decisions in the house? The papa, the papa. And why? We don't know. Tradition. Somewhere along the way, right? In the beginning, when they
Right.
started that tradition, there must have been a reason. And there must have
Right.
been something that people are like, yeah, actually, it'd be great if you took this role. And
And
this
it's
was,
going to benefit everyone,
yes,
hopefully, most.
hopefully. I mean, and it could be, obviously, there are times when it's like, actually, that was started in a way to or oppress people. That's possible.
Yes,
Sure,
yeah.
I don't know.
I was like, oh
But
yeah, patriarchy, but
yeah, right? Like, oh, they were like, oh, we don't want the women to talk so much, but I don't know. But any tradition we're hoping starts at the root of something that is benefiting people and
right.
enlivening people and creating a safety or a help or a therapy or just a joy, like a celebratory tradition, right?
Right.
But like we talked about, you mentioned Valentine's Day. Somebody thought that was so cute one day and it became a thing. And now a lot of us moms are like, another year of making a Valentine's Day box for 4 children. Just can't.
And the candy mid-February. It's like
Oh my word,
just
so much
no.
candy. It's like
No.
Halloween, Christmas, Valentine's Day, Easter, just the amount of candy we end up with. I'm like, I just
Which
beg for summer.
yeah.
Give me
Yeah.
summer where
Yeah.
there's no more of those candy traditions. That's the tradition I want to see annihilated. Can we stop doing so many candy traditions? Like, give my kids
Yes.
pencils. They always need more pencils.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and not that we have to do candy, right? I haven't done candy for a lot of these, but it's everywhere. Like
Everywhere.
the amount of energy into begging that go, entering the store with your children during those seasons, it's like,
Yeah.
oh.
It's true. It's true. So also not a
Agreed.
tradition, maybe a tradition we need to
Definitely
all
not
evaluate together.
enlivening.
Oh, I was gonna bring up that one side note, that story about the cat. So there was like this guru that would teach in this classroom and I think in India years and years and years ago. And after a long time, the guru passed away and his students took over and they were all passing down his traditions and his wisdom. And every time there was class, though, there would be a cat tied up outside to the tree.
Oh,
And
yes.
they would just have it on a leash and have it tied next to this tree. And so before they could start class, everybody would check in and be like, is the cat tied up? Did we tie the leash the cat to the tree? Is it okay? Like, okay, we can start. And one day somebody says, why are you doing that? And they're like, I don't know, we've just always done that. Um, Now, what happened was that when the guru would teach, there was a stray cat that just loved to be around everybody and would climb over everybody and cause a lot of nuisance. And so they're like, let's just tie the cat about to the tree to keep it out of the way. But then they forgot why they were doing it. And at some point, it turned into like, somebody go find a cat and tie it to the tree. We can't start until class has a cat outside. And nobody knows why, but you got to go find a cat for this
Right.
tradition. And they're worried it became a superstition, right? Of like, maybe
Mm-hmm.
something bad's going to happen. Maybe we won't be as
Mm-hmm.
enlightened. Maybe what are these like twisted things we've created in our minds about what
Right.
happen if we don't have a cat outside?
Right.
When honestly, it was just something common sense in the beginning. It
Right.
really had no special meaning.
Right.
So I think that's an important point too, is that like it turns into a superstition. What if there's no cat outside? Or what if the
Yes.
papa doesn't make all the decisions in the family, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I love that because in Fiddler on the Roof, his kids start making different choices and he
right,
re-examines and re-examines and re-examines. And I think we see that happen with our parents and we'll see that happen as our kids, move up and begin their lives. We re-examine all the things we taught, we re-examine our practices. And I love that story about the cat and how you bring up the superstitions that arise and people start making up, oh, you know what? I think there's a reason for this. And I bet the reason's that we need cat energy or something like that
yeah,
because there's more fear surrounding breaking the tradition and what would happen, right? Like Moana leaving the reef and
right,
the what ifs would happen, or me stopping praying the way that I was taught to my whole life. The
right,
fear of what that means about me, what that is going to bring into my life, take out of my life. And that's how, bam, fear based tradition happens until someone's
right,
willing to re examine it. And and it's just so big what can happen when you're able to place fear and say, no, I will move forward with faith that I will be caught by the universe, that I will be caught by source, that I will be caught by God's love, that I will be caught by the atonement of Christ, whatever flavor that is for you, that hits, that I was meant to move forward and stop crippling down. And does that automatically mean you're killing tradition? No, because maybe you learn that is a good tradition and all it does is revitalize it and re energize it and keep it pushing forward throughout the generational lines, something good and alive. But if we're not willing and if we're stuck in fear and we don't have the courage to actually question those traditions and re-examine them, I feel like that's when you get stuck. And it
absolutely.
happens very easily.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. I love how you said that. And yes, that whole point of what if, what if, and then all of a sudden turning, if we can turn it in our minds, like you said, to I'm going to be caught. I'm going to just I'll be okay. Let's put
Mhm.
faith in that source, universe, God, however, like you said, however it works for people, that what if I put trust in that and then I'm okay? And I think
Yeah.
that mentally, psychologically is so important because we're learning that by those experiences, right, of if I let this go, and then
Hmm.
what's going to happen? What's going to happen? It's kind of like when you're a kid and you turn a light off in a room and you're like, oh my gosh, the demons are going to get me. And then you stand there a minute and you're like, nothing happened. I guess we're actually okay. Maybe there's nothing to fear,
Yeah.
actually. Right?
Yeah.
It was an
Well,
illusion in my mind.
and I think what the craziest part of it is that it's not even just with traditions. It's everything we do in our life. And the
Yes.
question and being able to step back and question, why do I do that?
Mm. Yes.
And know why you do what you do. And it's amazing how often the answer is fear. Why
Mhm.
do I act the way I act? You know, why do I interact that way? Why do I connect that way? Why do I lash out that way? So
That's
it's
so
it's
true.
such a broad topic, but truly can be brought down to the individual micro level and just, I mean, bloom your life.
Yeah.
Boom and bloom it.
Boom and bloom. I love that. Another plug for consciousness, awareness. I similarly, it was not that long ago, actually, maybe like a few months ago, I had this thought and I realized how deeply some traditions had been fear motivators for me
Mm,
my entire life. Like the big things I would or wouldn't do. And it came down to I started thinking about apocalyptic stuff, which
yeah,
I see in a very different way now. I see it very differently. Not so much of this. I need to prep. I need to make sure I have all this stuff. And I do like, I think it's wise to be a prepared person. And I do have like
right.
some food storage. I'm not like way out there, but um, I'm not that it's bad if you are. Just I'm just not that prepared.
Yeah.
Um, but but I do find that I was looking at that and the way that I'm shifting the way I'm thinking is I feel that the world is moving into an alignment situation.
Mhm.
And there may be catastrophes that go along with that, but I feel so much more faith and so much more excitement and hope for the future, where before it was, no, before Jesus comes, it's going to be black stuff and people are going to be killing each other for their food, et cetera, and all this stuff. And that fear-based tradition literally had me making decisions for my entire life based on okay, but when I'm older, because we were the chosen generation and Jesus is coming and all this stuff that
Right,
was taught to
right,
us, that it literally had me making decisions based on that, that was like, um, what kind of career I would have, or
right,
how much I would invest into something, my energy or money or time, etc. Where I would live and if I would live close to water or if I wouldn't. And like it
right, right,
literally, and like I said, I have dealt with OCD compulsions. So for me, it ramped up so much or was affecting like every decision in my life, and I didn't even recognize it.
right.
Didn't
Yes.
even realize how much it was affecting all decisions because there was still this play in my head saying, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but in not too long, you're going to be, fighting people off of your roof to make sure they stay away from your family and your food or
Yes.
something.
You needed a
And I just don't
fortress.
believe that anymore. Like, and
Right,
whether that happens, that could happen, but I'm just not going to live my life that way anymore.
right. Oh my goodness, that hits hard because I felt that way too. I was like, before we moved into this house, which by the way, my house is all concrete. It's built of pure concrete. It's a really, really, really unique, cool build that this guy, a bridge builder, a bridge engineer built. And so he made it all of concrete. But I was like, yes, I have a fortress now. I'm gonna get like light beams, like lights everywhere, and we're gonna build walls, and it's gonna be like this big fortress. And you know, that was before I moved into this house and I realized I am my fortress. I don't need the
Ah,
concrete walls. I don't need the lights. What is it that's gonna get us through that? It's gonna be recognizing our power and also our agency. and using that as power because, and they teach that in our church, right? That's
Yeah.
God's greatest gift to us is agency. Well, oh my goodness, it is so empowering to finally say, I'm dropping the fear and I'm doing the thing that
Yeah.
maybe I was even told not to do or wouldn't be encouraged to do, but I've thought about it and it feels right. And then, and, and feel so blessed for it and recognize that, yeah, you're your fortress. I mean,
Well, and that, sorry,
what
go ahead.
what shift? No, it's fine. I'm curious what shift that created in you from that crystal that was growing up and making every decision based off of that fear in, your OCD state. Like, what's the difference then versus now?
100% peace.
Mm,
And that's around a lot of things. I mean, this is just one aspect. But yes, so much more peace and trust, and also just believing in this idea that we have to have all these things. I mean, I know people that they have weapons buried around their house and they have food storage galore, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but what I
right.
want to recognize is that feels like certainty.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a certainty. Just from my experience in OCD, it feels like a certainty compulsion to an extent.
Right.
Um, so for me, it's important not to go that far so that I'm not encouraging my certainty compulsions. And that gives me more room to be safe, to feel that faith and peace in the gap. In that gap is like the faith of saying, like, I know it's gonna be
Yes.
okay. And I even had an experience a couple years ago. During COVID is when I bought most of our food storage. Actually, it was like the summer before because I could kind of tell something was going down. And so the summer before, we bought a bunch of food storage. And I think it was like the next year or two, I had this moment where I was talking with God and I just was kind of like, I'm so glad you gave me that notion to get all that food storage before COVID. Thank you so much. And like, that's so great. And like,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm so prepared. And then God was like, and I could take it all away in a second. And then what would you do?
Yes. Yes.
And I thought, that's interesting. You're right. I could have a flood wash it away. I could have a sinkhole under my house. It would all be gone in a second. And then what would I do?
Mm-hmm.
The feeling I got spiritually was it's good that you are mindful and it's good that
Mm-hmm.
you want to be prepared. But do you actually have faith? Do you actually believe that like you'll be taken care of? That you live in an
Right.
abundant world, that I have created every plant here to make sure that you're sustained.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is one of the greatest fear-based traditions of this entire world is the
Mm-hmm.
scarcity tradition.
Yes.
And I
Scarcity
am
mindset. Yeah.
done, done with it.
Oh my goodness. She looks done. Y'all can't see her, but she's done.
Uh,
Boom and bloom, baby.
boom and bloom. That's right.
I absolutely love that insight of like, yeah, I'm feeling so prepared. I've made my plans, I've executed them. Here's my system. I'm ready for it. And then God said, and it could be all taken away in a second.
And then
And
what?
so what, yeah,
Yeah.
that lesson of like, yes, he or it, the universe, source,
She,
whatever,
yeah.
is our fortress. And it's within us, which means we are our fortress. And it's ultimately always where we come back to when doing the work to find peace. Yeah, ourselves.
Right. And I think that's so interesting that we have conflated peace with well, faith with certainty, because we're saying,
Hmm.
well, faith is believing in, I don't know, it could be anything, a person or a scripture or whatever. Um, when really we're being fed certainty. you know?
Mm-hmm.
I have faith
Mm-hmm.
that all my prayers, like you're saying, I have faith that my prayer is going to save me, when really
Right.
you're using it as an act of certainty. And
Well,
that tradition wasn't feeding you.
right. Well, and I think you can say certainty and you could also call it safety because
Yeah.
systems create safety and systems have a huge function and they're great.
Hmm.
But in terms of the safety that we feel we're gaining, um, I think it's false. We think it's safety
Mm.
that we're gaining in choosing to be a part of a system or um, being a part of a system when we don't even know and we see so many benefits in that
Yeah.
we reap and it's true, but when it comes to safety, it's I feel like I don't know if I'd always agree with this, but right now I think it's a lie. It's a facade. It's a fake.
Mm.
Systems, I don't know if they create safety. I think it's just our individual self that creates safety.
What do you
Um,
mean by systems?
I mean, government systems, religious systems,
Hmm.
educational systems, like go to college.
And
That's
you'll be
job
fine.
security. That's job security. Well, guess what? A whole load of people are like, "What? I went to college and I've not found job security, right?" So you went
Hmm.
with this in mind and then you feel lied to after. So what's going on within the education system, what being a part of a government system in a country, um, people feel that they're being offered safety and you grow up in it and there's large groups of people who do not feel safe within the system anymore and you question it.
Right.
That's when the questioning comes in and specifically within religion as well.
Mm.
Um, people are told this is the safe path. And whether we want to admit it or not, we choose the path because we think that means that the ending will be perfect, that we'll
Right.
be taken care of, that yes, we'll go through hardships, but nothing too hard, nothing we can't handle. But every human realizes there's going to be situations where you're like, wow, am I going to make it out of this?
Mm.
And that the system that you thought was providing you security, the whole time you were focusing on living within the system so you'd have security, when the truth was you were completely ignoring the self. So
Yeah.
there was no safety.
And I think the self, the true self and this divine essence and higher self consciousness, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
um, is it has certain aspects to it. And one of it is a safety because, how do I put it? I
Are
don't
you
know
bringing
how
in
if
the
I have the words for it.
polarity?
I'm gonna just say yes, but also that too, that aspect of there is the polarity too. And because interestingly, we're constantly avoiding pain,
Mhm.
right? What is safety other than avoiding pain? And yet, if you look at the points of your life where you've grown the very most, it's where you managed to survive and live through the hardest points or most painful points
Right.
of your life, right?
Right.
So is safety really what we're looking for? I don't know. I think what we're really afraid of, honestly, is meaningless pain or
Hmm.
unnecessary pain because we don't want
Which,
to live. What are you saying?
well, I feel like anyone who ever starts to experience any pain is like, this is meaningless.
Yeah. Which is why we always ask why? Like, why is
Yeah.
this happening to me? Why is this now? Why is this? And
Right.
instead, and what I've started to do instead, I know many people that do this. I was in a car accident recently, and when I would just step back and I'm like, I can't believe this happened. Like, I'm so just flabbergasted by this. And I'm stepping back and I'm looking at my mangled car and I'm thinking to myself, I was tempted. Now I practice this a lot. So I was tempted to think, why is this happening? But I just actually don't go that path anymore because I practice this so much. And instead, I think, this is all turning out for my good.
Mm-hmm.
This is all in the path and alignment for my best and highest good. And this is
Yeah.
all working for me.
Yeah.
And and it actually like everything after that has worked out. And that's always given me, instead of the certainty, it gives me the faith and the
Right.
or trust or surrender. Because I think, like you said, a lot of these words are interchangeable. Like
Right.
um certainty can be translated as safety. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but also the surrender and the trust, that aspect, that has been so healing for me. And it's one of the
Right.
most important parts for me in balancing and keeping a regulated nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's been ditto as well. That's been my uh biggest shift for my nervous system. You can do all the therapies, the somatic and the breath work and everything, but yeah, what you said is the meat of it. I was just gonna say, I think everything it's really interesting everything that we've been talking about and coming back to the self authority, self trust and awareness and etc. How interesting it is that right now the generations just behind us are dealing with complete isolation. That
Oh,
with screens and with the focus on self, people are having a hard time connecting, right? That's why everyone's
yes.
looking for a community. And so I just wanted to bring that up because there is such a light and a dark side to everything. And um, within religion, I can tell my story and someone will say, well, that's not been my experience. Oh, I never
Right.
thought of it that way. Well, that's not how I internalized it. And it's like, well, I'm your shadow side then, because bam, here I am. I'm the shadow. Um,
Right.
and so, yeah, I just wanted to give recognition to that shadow side of the
Mhm.
self and how truly, truly it can also be devastating if not done coming from the correct space of uh faith, you know. Um if it's also done in the fear angle, coming from the fear angle, then it'll be devastating just like a religion can be if practiced from a fear angle. Um that's when you get, oh, I don't know how to trust people. I can only rely on myself. I can't have relationships because um I don't feel like I can trust anyone but myself, right? This heavy
Right.
self-reliance. Anyways, that's totally a different subject, but I just wanted to give a moment to the shadow side and
No, I
say,
appreciate
we
that.
see you.
I do. I love that because that is a deep dive that I've also been going down, that, like you said, we can talk more about in more depth later, but this integration. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that is the point right now, is to bring up the fact that there is the integration between the traditions and the fear traditions, and it
Mm-hmm.
recognizing, as we're recognizing shadow self, just like Carl Jung talked about, um,
Right.
you have to have both. You have to recognize both to integrate them into wholeness. Just
Mm-hmm.
like we can't be all sunshine rainbows, we can't be all love and light all the time and not recognize that there's anger, and not recognize that
Yes.
there's grief, that there's sadness, and just pretend that those don't exist or never indulge in those. But to
Yeah.
say these all are important.
Yeah.
Now let's integrate it so we can be a whole being and live our best life with our best purpose, best intention, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like that you said, I'm your shadow self. Hello.
Bam. Yeah, it actually reminds me of the show. What's the emotion movie
Oh,
with the emotions?
yeah. Inside Out.
Yes, Inside Out. I
Inside Out.
loved number one, loved number two. And I so often think, when we're in that positive state, anyone in the shadow, we're like, can you freaking leave me alone to enjoy this state?
Hmm.
And I think that's okay. I think it's okay. Because the shadow is going to call to you the way that it always does, and it's going to get to you eventually to pay attention. And it's usually when you need to pay attention to that side.
Right.
But,
Uh-huh.
you know, how often are we on a high? Like, let's live it up there. And when we're on that high light side, we're like, everyone in shadow, move, leave me alone. And so, a question of like, how do we integrate when we really want to enjoy that vibration or frequency or state that we're in and enjoy it? I think it's acceptance. It doesn't mean you have to say, "Hey, I'm in my light phase. Come on, shadow, join me. Come in to my light room." But
Right.
awareness that it's there and not say, "Oh, you don't exist. You don't exist. I can't look at you. I can't even talk to you. I can't be around you." Anyways, you brought up integration of the two, and that's what I've been thinking a lot about is, well, how do we enjoy the phase we're in while staying integrated with the two sides so that we can have this full experience? And I think it has to do with saying, "Hey, I see you. I know you're there. I'm not ignoring you, but I'm going to enjoy this. We'll meet up
Yeah,
later."
that's a good point. And yes, that whole the dynamic of enjoying what you can and then but also what would be the word? Honoring. I like the word honoring each emotion.
Hmm. Yeah.
And my friend Jill Freestone and I have been discussing lately about there's been like a really intense energy right now. Um, we just had the presidential inauguration a few days ago. And anyway, I don't know about everybody else, but for at least for my household, it's been just crazy things happening over and over and over. We'd be like, okay, this
Hmm.
isn't working. Well, let's try this instead. We're trying to be positive. And then that doesn't work out. And okay, but we can do this instead. And
Yes.
that doesn't work out. It was like one thing after another till finally I was like, you know what, guys, this sucks. I don't
Yeah.
like it. And I just
Yep.
honored that, was like, okay, you know what? It's okay to not be positive all the time too. But like Jill and I were talking about is let me feel what's going on right now and give a moment to that emotion. I'm angry. I'm angry this is so hard. I'm angry that this isn't working out. And then there was
Yes.
shoot, I don't know his handle. If you follow this guy on Instagram, he's a therapist and he has red hair and a red beard. I think he wears
Redwood.
glasses. Cannot remember his name. If you told me, I probably wouldn't even remember. You probably
He's
follow him.
blonde.
But he had this really great practice where he said, unless you're in suicide thoughts and ideation right now,
Oh,
don't do
right.
this. He's like, but everybody else, he said, just find the feeling you're having right now in your body, or find like whatever's on your mind and what thoughts you're having, find where you feel it in your body. And whatever you're feeling, go ahead, take a deep breath, and then just say, you belong. And I'd actually been having a ton of pain in my womb space, which I thought was weird because I'm breastfeeding. And so it's like, I'm not cramping or something. What is this?
Hmm.
And so I was like, I'll try it. Sure. And I took a deep breath and I just focused on that feeling in my body. And I said, you belong. And it literally dissipated that minute,
Hmm. Hmm.
which comes back to, and I have so many podcast episodes, but
I
another
know.
podcast episode we're going to be doing on this correlations between different types of healing. And one being Satnam Rasayan, something I did a very short workshop on. I'd love to get trained in it. Um,
Hmm.
Another being quantum touch healing, my friend Karina is doing. And there's, and even in homeopathy, we talked about this in Polo. You were mentioning about like just the aspect or the first take in of homeopathy is like just this listening is the first step towards your healing. The listening of the
Hmm.
practitioner listens to you as you really just dump everything. Um, all of these have a similar theme, a very similar theme of allowing the emotion, recognizing it, gaining consciousness, and between two people, allowing it
Yep.
and honoring it and letting it pass through. And it creates
Yes.
a healing. And we're going to go into that more and the deep diver later. But Isn't that amazing? Like that happens. I know this is so off topic, but that's where
No,
our
yeah,
chats
yeah.
go.
Yeah.
This isn't not all episodes are going to be this yeah, squirrel, not quite
Yeah.
all like that, but at
Yeah.
least for
So
us, this is kind of how we talk.
that's why we can go for hours.
It's
I
true.
mean, we go down the rabbit holes for sure. I do want to, if I want to add on to that, you actually sent me that the pinpoint the feeling, the emotion in your body. Where is the tension? Where is the emotion? And then
That's
tell it
right.
you belong. And when you say that, it makes me want to cry every time. When I heard him say that, it made me want to cry. I cry
Oh,
super easily, but um, it was when you sent me that, I was really worried for one of my daughters. And so the feeling was like in my abdomen, like that clenching tight, like worry, right? And so when he said that and I told it, that tightness in my abdomen, you belong, it reminded me that just because something feels wrong doesn't or feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. And when I told that feeling of worry for my daughter, you belong, it dissipated. And I realized
oh,
it's good that I worry for my daughter. It's okay that I worry for my daughter. And the tension comes when I think something's wrong, that something's gone wrong because she's struggling and I'm worried for her. When nothing's gone wrong, in fact, it all belongs and it all is the way. If we want to talk about that, um, that'd be a different discussion. But um, it was such a good reminder, and it also reminds me again of Inside Out. The whole purpose at the end of the first movie, right, was that everything belonged. Sadness
right.
belonged and grief belonged. And so often we experience these, and it's just because of that pain thing. We don't want pain. We don't want to suffer. And so it's like, oh, um, but it's so, so beautiful that it all belongs and it is working together for our good. I mean, I do believe there are exceptions to this, um, but the vast majority of at least our life experiences within the United States, I feel do align with that they belong. So
Oh, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That
yeah.
definitely resonates. And I like that you point out the feeling, we want to call it bad when
Hmm.
really it's uncomfortable. And
Right.
I've been trying to train myself to get out of the thinking of good versus bad for a lot of things, especially for feelings,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's any bad feelings. They're just messages. They're just letting us know our feelings are our teachers, our triggers are our teachers, and it's uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
just because something's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's bad. I can be training for a marathon and be uncomfortable and panting, but my body's getting stronger and I'm feeling successful. And that doesn't mean it's
Right.
bad. And just that
Or
feeling I had, yeah, was so
yeah.
good
Yeah.
because you do care about your daughter. And I think the consciousness when we step back and say, where does this feeling come from? Right, that step back out of the reptilian brain. What am I feeling and why? Where does that come from? Where is this anger coming from? Oh, because I self-betrayed. Oh, why did I self-betray? Maybe because I was self-protecting. Why was
Yeah.
I self-protecting? Because I love myself.
Yes.
What?
Name it, Crystal. What?
Right? Somebody brought that up
It's
recently.
love.
Oh, I was
Yes.
self-betraying. And they said, no, I don't feel you were self-betraying. I feel you were self-protecting. Because yes, if you dive down, it really is not because you're a bad person. And if you're going to
Yeah.
label your feeling as bad, you're going to assume that because you had it, you're bad,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. It isn't just worry, like, oh, this random worry, useless, pointless pain that's useless and pointless. It's love, you
Yes.
know? And um I think the other thing is it's uncomfortable, but it of course made me think of labor and delivery, delivering a
Oh,
baby, and the
yes.
whole experience of that. How oh, this is bad. I think when a woman's delivering her baby and is going through all that, physical experience, um, I don't think we're like, oh, this is bad, but maybe this feels uncomfortable and this something's gone wrong. Like our body's like, oh my gosh, this is so much. Something's gone wrong. When
Yeah.
100% we know that it's the biggest miracle and we grew a human and birthed a life into our world. I mean, nothing's gone wrong, you know? But wow, talk about feeling like something's wrong when you're in labor. You're like, wait,
Like, I'm being torn to
gotta
shreds from
be
the
wrong.
inside. It's
Yeah,
okay.
something's gone wrong because there's a whole lot of feelings that I'm not fond of right now.
Right. Not fun of, but also
Yeah,
could be, yeah. And there's all the nuance to that, but
yeah, yeah,
so true.
yeah.
What a good point. And beautiful because I do think the subject of rebirth and the symbolism of rebirth, birth and rebirth is, I'm glad you brought it up because it's in all of it. It's in
Yeah,
all of it. It's on all the feelings. It's in our progression. It's in the way we learn. It's in the traditions we're having, and the reason we
yeah.
have rituals and intention and consciousness. Like all of it is because we're constantly growing and because we're
Hmm.
constantly rebirthing. P.S. If you hear my baby, she's adorable and she's playing on the floor.
She's so cute.
She woke up from her nap early, and
Oh,
that's okay because we love her.
yeah,
Um,
she's in the cute phase.
she is. Oh, she's cute. But thanks for bringing that up because I do find that is so important to validate and recognize that even I would almost say actually that every time there is a big discomfort, it's right on the cusp of something new and
Hmm.
a new life, a new awareness, a new um energy, a new life force, like whatever it is, new project, whatever it is, something new is being created. And I feel like that could be true. That when there's
Hmm.
a big discomfort, it's usually because something new is about to be birthed.
Yeah. So your crappy week, you're in labor.
I'm in labor. Transition. I was thinking that too. I was like, maybe that means the podcast is going to be super successful. Don't know.
Duh. Duh, it is.
Yeah. I know some people call it opposition or something. I don't really want to term it that way myself.
Right.
Um, I don't want to give rise to this idea that something out there is against me and I'm
Yeah.
fighting constantly. I just think that there are things like birth. There's this, I
Yeah.
don't feel like I had opposition in birth. It was, I guess it was the struggle that I went through to be stronger. Oh, I know exactly what it is. Here's the way I put it. You know the biosphere in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
did the biosphere years and years ago. I think they did two of
Yeah.
them, and they had these trees that they planted in the biosphere. For those who don't know, the biosphere is basically a ginormous shell, and they put
Mm-hmm.
people inside to kind of recreate. I think it was to see if they could live on Mars. And so they grew trees in there, and people lived in there for years to see if they could be sustainable just on their own in creating their own
Right.
atmosphere inside and not having, anything imported, exported, etc.
Right.
Um, they grew trees in the biosphere, and the trees grew so beautifully in the beginning, and they were growing tall, um, and they seemed normal and fine. One day, they just snapped, they broke
Mm-hmm.
and just collapsed. And everybody's
Yeah.
going, "What is the deal? Why wouldn't they be able to be sustained? Like, why would they break like that?" And it was because there was no wind in
Yeah.
the biosphere, right? So it never grew deeper roots
Yeah.
and it never grew what's called stress bark. And stress bark is
Mm-hmm.
actually a specific bark that grows nice and thick every time that there's wind, or what someone might say opposition. But like I'm going to say, I'm not going to call wind opposition. I'm going to call wind just part of the experience, right? Part of the
Right.
growth experience. And that wind created an opportunity for the trees to develop to be their very strongest. So I will say
Mm.
transition for birth and the birth process is, I mean, I definitely thought I was superwoman the first time I gave birth. I was on a high. I thought I could do anything. I just did that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And same thing when things come up. Once I'm on the other side and I just think, you know what? I don't think it was evil out to get me. I think it was just me
Yes.
being able to grow stronger.
Yeah. I I term it the polarity. That's what always comes to mind. I don't think it's
I like
coming
that.
after us, but just because when I think of polarity, I think of the yin and yang, however you say it. Um, that's the whole experience. That's the full circle
Right.
event. And so it's all involved in there. But yeah, I love that. Love that story
Yeah.
and that you felt like Superwoman after you delivered a baby. Heck yeah.
I did. Thanks for bringing that. Polarity I love as well. The law of polarity is something I have delved deeply into as well. So I love that. Awesome. Well, let's move forward a little bit and maybe do some summing up. So I want to go because we didn't really talk too much about ritual this time as we did so much last time.
Yeah.
Um, but why is ritual and tradition, why are they both important?
Are you asking for my opinion?
Yeah, I'm asking you. You go first.
Um, why are they important? I think, well, specifically with ritual, I think ritual is more of an individual thing, or maybe small groups of people, while tradition is more widespread, larger umbrella, farther reach, broad spectrum. Sorry, there we go.
Mm, there we go.
But ritual, it's it's the why behind why we do things. You know how we talked about like, well, why do you do that? And I think one of the points you've brought up, which was so, so beautiful, you had a homeopathic intake and right, um, your homeopath mentioned, well, why can't the breadcrumbs of your day be holy that you're wiping off the table, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And
Why can't the
and I
crumbs
think
be sacred?
yes, why can't
'Cause
the crumbs be sacred?
I was talking about kind of germophobic stuff
Mm-hmm.
and was like, the crumbs on the counter. And when I have to sweep them off, I have to like hold my breath and use a
Yeah.
napkin. And like it's hard for me. And I'll just so that they know what you're
Yeah,
talking
tell it.
about. I'll just go into for a
Yes,
second.
yes, tell it. Tell it.
Um, and so then he said, well, you mentioned you like incense. And when I burn incense, the door opens and it gets all over when you move it, it falls easily. And
Yeah.
especially the little sticks, they roll around, the ash rolls around very easily and it's messy or it can be. And he said, so doesn't that happen when you use incense? And I was like, yeah, but I consider that sacred. And he said, and crumbs can't be sacred.
Yeah.
Oh, it
So
was
big.
like a fist to the chest or something. So big. And then that whole consideration, and I thought, so what makes it sacred? And really, I
Hmm.
think it's the intention, which we talked about with ritual before. Right, intention.
Right. And so I think that with ritual, why is ritual important? Because ritual really is how we live our lives each day. And it's that awareness. So ritual, it's us knowing our why and it's putting meaning behind the things that we do instead of just blindly going through the motions every day. We're humans. That has a place, but ritual, I believe, brings meaning because it gives us answers to why we do the things that we do. And that's important to know why we do those things. Um,
Mhm.
it brings meaning to life. It brings us out of the survival into living. I think that's what ritual can do. Tradition, I think we touched on so many things of why tradition is important. It's it's the it's the teaching through tradition. It's the reminding through tradition. It's the um messaging that we can send through generations. And as long as we're doing tradition the way that it is intended, I think, which is re-examining, and revitalizing or starting again a new tradition, then I mean, it's such a beautiful thing and so, so needed. So that's what I would say my
Mm,
take on it is.
I
What
love
about
that.
you?
Oh, so many good things you pointed out. I agree. I think that the ritual is important. Um, One thing I was thinking of as you're mentioning that, yes, ritual, I think, is the tool for intention.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said before, once it becomes routine, it's not ritual anymore and it loses spiritual significance. So
Right.
um I think the intention, and I mentioned before last time, it was like, hold on, it gave me an insight that it's like, oh, well, maybe like waking my daughter up in the morning isn't a ritual. I mean, I do it every day, but
Right.
it's not necessarily ritual because it's not intentional. And it's like, hold on though. What if everything we did in our day was a ritual because it was
Mm-hmm.
all done with intention? And not that
Right.
it has to be the same thing every day, but just anything. I mean, because like there's some rituals I do once a year or twice a year.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but if everything was done, I think that's the goal of ritual, is to have the intention and the awareness. And then it's now I'm going to wake my daughter up with full intention of her knowing my love for her, her knowing that I want her to have a
Mm-hmm.
good day, her knowing that, or me also like giving myself permission to be in awareness, waking her up with awareness that I'm going to wake up with more intention, not like, oh my gosh, my alarm again, but I'm going to wake up with joy and love, knowing I get to go see my daughter. This is the intention and the ritual, and maybe even making it more special. I wake her up with a certain song or something like that.
Right.
Um, Now that I think is the important aspect of ritual, which can be community as well. I think tradition is generally more community, rituals more individualistic, but
Right.
it can be both. Um, and then tradition, I feel tradition, I keep thinking about what you mentioned about celebratory traditions. And then
Mm-hmm.
it made me think of grief traditions. And
Mm.
because it's kind of the other side of it, it's this way
Yes.
we hold community and hold space for each other. I like that you brought up how tradition and knowing your story brings confidence. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's true. And that's an important aspect of tradition. I also think tradition is important because it's kind of something to hold on to.
Yeah.
um Something that it's like I'm accustomed to this, or I can count on this, like for example, like somebody bringing a meal after you give birth, and it's like I can count
Right.
on this, something that
Right.
is
Right.
meaningful too, hopefully. So hopefully
Mm-hmm.
both of them are providing consciousness, awareness, and love. um
Right.
but I think the difference being that ritual is, like I said, more individualistic, tradition generally more community driven. um, but I think both at their essence is really trying to create consciousness and confidence, right? Like
Yes.
I think of like the Passover, and they have all the herbs and they have the wine and all these things to remember Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea. And if I was going to sum up that whole thing, like just in what I've experienced when I've experienced Passover, I'd say
Mm-hmm.
like the sum up would be we can do hard things,
Yeah.
right? And like God provides for us and we can do hard things.
Yeah.
And all of that to be, but in a beautiful ritual or a tradition. It
Right.
was both, right? Because it
Right.
was more an active thing.
Yeah.
Um, but those messages that are being passed down. And then I think it's important also to remember our self-authority and to remember what is enlivening and what's useful for me, and to give grace to people around us who aren't living the traditions the way we did, or whatever,
Hmm.
to say like maybe it doesn't serve them the way that it does me or the way it was originally intended.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
okay too. Everybody's got to live their own journey and there's nothing you can do to stop that.
And it doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. I mean, I think of me in prayer. You could come from the angle of like, oh, well, you're doing it wrong. you're praying wrong. You're using prayer wrong. But I don't think that's a really helpful angle to come from for me or the person saying that. The maybe more beneficial angle to come from is you've found how to do it right.
Yeah.
Because I call it prayer
Right for
still
you
what I
too.
do, right? So
Yeah.
just because it's not the same way doesn't mean it isn't actually the same thing. If
And
that sounds
the
confusing,
effect is
but
probably the same as what was intended when prayer was
right,
originally taught down and then passed down, passed down, passed down.
right,
And maybe their experience, like Moana, the whole thing is like, it
right,
was the same thing. You wanted the thing that was
right.
already there. Maybe that was the same experience for
Voyagers,
you.
that
Voyagers,
was the word.
Voyagers. That's the word.
One thing I wanted to bring up in this is in the talk of traditions is there's more than one way to skin the cat is the saying, right? And there's more than one way to pray. There's more than one way to practice traditions that mean the same thing. And so I think there can easily be judgment in, well, this is how we've always practiced this tradition in memoriam of the crossing of the Red Sea or whatever. But well, does that mean it has to only be practiced that way? You know,
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
then it kind of begs the question, is that really tradition? I kind of think it is. If you're doing the same thing and if you're doing it in the same energy and you're getting the same outcome, I'd consider it within the tradition.
I love that. So, and then maybe looking at the essence of it. What is the essence of this tradition? It's not necessarily that
Hmm.
we just do this every week, but
Right,
it's why do we do this every week?
right,
I often would think about blessing our food, and I
right.
would think, and it really would bother me all growing up when I would hear people, and please bless us for the nourishment and strength of our body, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you're just saying a routine thing. There is
And it's
no like,
Jello.
yeah, and it's Jello or it's cake or whatever. And and then I think, well, why am I not is can I put more feeling into this? Can I say something differently that would actually align with I really want to give thanks for this, not just say thanks for the food,
Right.
but I really want to acknowledge thank you for the farmers that grew the wheat. Thank you for the rains that blessed the earth so I could have this food, right? To put more intention in it. I think that's
Mhm.
the essence and the goal of tradition and
Yeah.
probably most ritual. Um, and if we are just looking at the essence, what are people getting out of this? If they're not doing it the way it looks like for everybody else, if they're doing it differently, is that really so terrible if they're getting the same essence and it works for them?
Right. Right. Yes, I love that. And I think a question for all of us should be, are there multiple times within our day that come up or within our week that come up when we want to be more intentional and we want to feel more gratitude or do better at having awareness around the things that are happening in our life? Like you said, like, can I do a prayer that is intentional? Do you actually feel grateful for what's happening and taking place in your life?
Right.
Because that's the re-examination that happens. If you're going to all these events, for me, church events, and you ask yourself, can I bring intention and gratitude to this? And you realize there is a lack of depth there, that's
Yeah.
a red flag of you not intentionally living or being really aware of what you're doing. That's just routine. And so
Right.
it either needs to be re-examined and re-enlivened or re-examined and changed. So I think that's always an important question to ask.
I love that. And like you said, routine is so 2000.
Yes.
We're done with routine. We're in ritual now.
Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for bringing up that
Yeah.
point. Awesome. Well, I do think that that's the overarching theme here is intention in everything possible. And even from pouring your water, there's a quote that says, I can't remember. Actually, there's a couple similar quotes. One of them, though, is like, when you walk, let your feet kiss the earth.
Yeah.
And it's like, what if every step you took was with so much intention and gratitude and love that your feet would be kissing the earth every time that you walked somewhere? And what if everything was that way? And I know that sounds like such an energy drain. And if
Mm-hmm.
it's a task and a routine, then yeah, for sure, it's going to be an energy drain and you're going to hate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it was intentional with what you feel, like how well do I really feel gratitude here? And just getting awareness and consciousness around that. And if not, why? Why am I
Mm-hmm.
not grateful to cook dinner?
Right.
Well, I know why I don't like to cook dinner.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
um, anyway, so what is the intention and where does that come from? And can we live with that intention all the time and with all the
Yeah.
things in our lives?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Love
thank
that.
you. What a good chat.
Thank you. I loved it. That was a good one.
So
You
fun.
know,
Always so
for
fun to
every
chat.
I know, for everything we said, you stopped yourself probably 5 times from going off. And I stopped myself like 5 times from going off. So I think we did good. Pound it, cousin.
Fist pump. We're making progress.
We can stay on topic-ish.
Ish, roundabout ways, but I think it's all good too, right? Like so many
Yeah.
good points. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so
Loved it.
much. And for our listeners, thanks for being here and joining us. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Conscious and Curious with Crystal Schultz and today with Azalea Klein. Join us next time. There's going to be some really interesting series coming up and can't wait to share more. So stay tuned and stay conscious and curious. Thanks so much. Take care.